Every single year there are people that decide to either come back to riding or swing a leg over a motorcycle for the very first time. And this video is for y'all, as I'm going to give you 7 things that you absolutely need to avoid as a first-time motorcyclist. Now you may say, well, I rode 20 years before and I just took a couple years off, so I know what the heck I'm doing. And while I understand what you're saying, it's also a perishable skill, so it is something that you may want to treat as a brand new thing coming in. Even though you may know the basics, it's still something definitely worth paying attention to these 7 things specifically. And so if you like the type of videos that I'm doing here, including videos just like this, honest bike reviews, comparisons, a whole host of motorcycle content, make sure you subscribe, hit your notifications. Also, if you want to join the Shot Squad, you could do that right here on YouTube or over on Patreon. Let's go and get into it. So the first thing that you absolutely want to consider before you even buy that motorcycle is the helmet that you're going to choose. This is crucial, right? This is one of the most crucial things that you can do. Now, I know that there's going to be people that buy a brand new motorcycle, right, as their first time bike. Maybe not the best decision. You may have a strong opinion on that. I want to hear everybody's opinion after this video on all of these topics. But there's also going to be people that buy a cheap motorcycle. They want to see if they even like this, and then they'll kind of go up from there. But no matter what the cost of your first bike is or your returning bike is, the helmet needs to be the best quality that you can afford. Now you may say, well, what is the difference between a $100 helmet and a $700 helmet? And you literally pay for what you get a lot of the times, not all the time, but a lot of the time. So let's take a showy helmet, right? These guys go through rigorous testing, additional testing, safety, testing in their helmets to make sure that they are going to hold up in the event of a crash. While you may have some that are not even, registered, and at a very minimum, you want it to be DOT safety inspected, and even then, DOT is, it's okay, but it's just like the base, the minimum standard that you want to go with. In 2021, there was over 5,900 riders that lost their lives, and over 2,200 of those riders were not wearing a helmet. Now you may say, yeah, well, what about the other riders that were wearing a helmet? Well, yeah, that's true, but there's actually other factors revolving around those accidents, some of which I'm actually going to cover in this video. So while it doesn't all come down to helmet, these things are just super important. And I hate to be preachy on it, but it's one of those things I felt like I really needed to start this video with because of how important it is. You're 37% more likely to actually prevent a head injury if you have a helmet on. And so while they can't prevent them all, it is definitely a piece of gear that you don't want to cheap out on, and you definitely don't want to forego, regardless of the laws in your state. I don't believe that you should, the government or the state should come in and tell people what they have to do. But even if you don't have a helmet law, it's something that you really, really want to consider and make sure that you get a good one. Next thing I want to talk about is getting your license. When I was looking at some of these statistics from 2021, it was actually pretty shocking to see that almost a third, actually over a third, of motorcyclists that were involved in accidents didn't even have a license. And we're talking about fatal accidents too. So this is a huge problem that I really didn't even know existed. Now, I will say right here in my home state, when I first started riding, this was back in 2006, you could just basically keep renewing your permit, and that's what a lot of people did. And to get your permit was basically just a written test. You read a book, boom, there you go, you can get out on the road. And I'm talking about the safety part of it. Anybody can ride a motorcycle fast and they can go down the road, and the motorcycle's basically doing the work. But there's a lot more that goes into this stuff. And so, getting a license though is number one. That's something you should absolutely do. And I believe that the best way for you to do that is actually going through an MSF course. Now, there's some things that I've seen in MSF courses that kind of go against things that I've learned since then, as far as keeping your feet down and, kind of duck walking the bike. But they start you off just like that. And while I don't really agree with that, they're still going to show you a heck of a lot more than you just trying to do the basic road test. So I think going through the MSF course, it's going to cost you a little bit of money, but really it's a drop in the bucket compared to some of the stuff that you will at least learn in that 1 or 2 day class. We're always kind of trying not to become a statistic, and if one of the easiest ways that we can not become a statistic is to get our motorcycle license, but also do it in a way where we're actually getting some training at the same time, that is the way to go. Definitely want to get started on the right foot, and that's going to lead me perfectly into the next thing. Please don't think that motorcycle training is something that you have to take, once you've spent a couple thousand miles in the saddle. Now, there's different levels to training, of course, but this is something that you could start right now. And the beautiful part about it is you could start it for free. There are a ton of different trainers right here on YouTube that can show you some of the basics and, more advanced skills that you're going to want to learn. Now you may say, well, yeah, but a lot of those trainers are showing like slow speed maneuvers. How is that going to help me in doing, quick maneuvers or being safe in the corners? When in reality, it's kind of the opposite effect. By showing that you can do slow speed maneuvers, by showing that you have a good handle on the clutch and the throttle and being able to work that, knowing when to use the front brake and the rear brake or just using the rear brake. Knowing how to go in and out of the friction zone and doing slow speed turns and U-turns and all of that stuff actually will help you once you go to some of the more advanced training, like, trail braking. Trail braking is another thing that I thought was just kind of, just advanced. And so I needed to spend more time before I ever started doing that until I realized that's something I should be doing in the corners pretty much all the time. Not only is it going to increase your traction, but if you're on the brake just a little bit, about 5% of pressure, that will actually help steer your bike in through corners. You can come in a little bit quicker, but you also are already on the brakes a little bit, and so if something happens in that corner, you're not going to jab at that thing because you're already on it, and you can just kind of squeeze the brake handle back. So there's a lot of really important things that you can learn in these classes. So just like your helmet, it's another part of the investment. And again, I know this sounds super preachy and I freaking hate doing that, but these first 3 things are just so freaking important. Helmet, getting your license, and making sure that you're getting training right off the rip. You don't have to wait for anything. All you really need to do is get that thing scheduled, or at least at the bare minimum, take your bike out to a parking lot. Get some cones and, go out there and start practicing, because you're really going to start to see, oh man, I thought I could, turn my handlebars. I thought I could make a stop within, 30 feet or so. And you just don't know what you don't know until you actually do it. If you've never done an emergency stop, if you've never, been at a stoplight and we keep the bike in gear, you have a car coming up behind you, are you really going to be confident enough to be able to turn the bars and get the heck out of the way if needed? And I'm here to tell you, unless you have that training and you have that muscle memory, you're most likely not going to use it. You're most likely going to depend on your instincts. And unfortunately, a lot of our instincts on motorcycles are absolutely wrong. Another thing that you want to avoid as a new motorcyclist is other motorcyclists. But not every motorcyclist, just some motorcyclists. So let's say you have a friend that gets you into motorcycles, right? And you caught the bug and now you're ready to get on your first bike. You went through all of these steps, right? You maybe even got some training, which is fantastic, right? Well, now you're at the point where you're like, man, I want to ride with some of my buddies. This is where you really have to make a judgment call, because sometimes with some people, they have been riding for a long time. They may be untrained, but to you, you may say, oh man, I see him going really fast. He must know what he's doing. But that's not always the case. And that's something that training will kind of open your eyes to, is you'll start to notice little things with little riders, and that will kind of tell you, how safe or how much they actually know. But regardless, those type of friends and riders, you may not want to ride with at first, because one thing that's easy to get drawn into is actually riding in a group or with just one friend that's a bad influence, and now you start to learn either bad techniques or you're going to put yourself in a position where you might actually get yourself hurt. You know, just because they're taking a corner at 60 miles an hour, let's just say, doesn't mean you can take that corner at 60 miles an hour. And I'm not saying that all of your friends are just worthless. And I'm not saying that they're untrained. They may be fully trained. But if they don't have the understanding that, hey, I'm riding with somebody that is pretty much brand new, I need to slow it down and consider them, that's not somebody I want to be riding with. You know, if you're going to lead, no matter if it's 1, 2, or 12 other people as a lead, there's a lot of things that you have to do. You're looking up the road, you're letting other riders know behind you of, you know, potential hazards in the road, and you're also just keeping an eye on the people behind you or the friend behind you, right? You want to make sure that you're, you know, just paying attention to them and making sure that you're slowing down enough for them to, you know, help them be comfortable. You don't want to put them in a bad spot. So if you have a friend like that, I would say absolutely avoid them until you kind of learn to ride your own ride. I can remember when I first started riding, specifically when I got my 2019 Street Glide. And at one point we rode with a pack of people. I didn't know most of them. I knew one of them, but I didn't know most of them. But anyways, we were riding with them, and you know, we went up to this pretty popular bar slash restaurant. And so, yeah, pretty cool, right? But I found myself paying attention to the other riders, not really the road. It is something you almost have to train your eyes to do when you get into a group of people. It's really easy to just follow them. And so your senses start to go down, and that's where things can happen. If they're not paying attention, and especially if it's only, you know, 2 or 3 of you, that's where you really got to be paying attention because they may not be. So it is something that you may want to avoid depending upon the friends that you have that are also riding. Now, I know I've talked about things you want to avoid and maybe even people you want to avoid when you become a new motorcyclist or you're a returning rider. But there's also something that you have to understand. At some point, you're gonna drop your motorcycle, but where you drop your bike is going to be highly dependent upon you and your skill set and how much you pay attention. Now, there's things that happen, right? There's accidents that do happen, and sometimes you've tried to do everything in your power, you've taken the training, you have safety features on your bike that are going to help you, and sometimes things just happen, right? That's something you kind of just have to accept as a motorcyclist. It happens in cars, it happens to anybody that, you know, rides on the road. But more often than not, a lot of the hazards and stuff on the road and a lot of the mistakes that riders make are things that you can absolutely avoid. The ones that have crashed and the ones that are going to crash. So basically it's like saying that every single motorcycle rider out there, no matter who you are, no matter the skill set you have, no matter the training you've done, you're going to have an accident at some point. I don't subscribe to that. I think it's kind of one of those ways for people that have been into accidents to just kind of say, hey, you're gonna be there at some point. And like I said, I know that I am not immune to accidents. I understand that there's a lot of stuff that I have to work on to make sure that my skills are as sharp as they can be to avoid accidents. But I also don't believe that just because you get on 2 wheels, you're automatically going to have an accident. Now again, things do happen, but a lot of this stuff can be avoided with the proper training. Serious injuries obviously can be avoided with the proper gear. But you will drop your bike at some point. But we want to try to keep those drops for a parking lot, you know, while we're training, as opposed to out on the street where it really matters. So yes, technically every rider at some point is going to drop their motorcycle, but where you drop it is highly dependent upon you and how serious you take motorcycling as a whole. Now, another thing you want to avoid as a new or returning rider is alcohol, speeding, and riding at night, especially on the weekends. According to the study that I read, during the weekdays from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. is where the most amount of fatal crashes happened. Now, along with not wearing a helmet, 27% of the fatalities, they actually had alcohol greater than 0.08% in their bloodstream. 34% of those riders were speeding. And then when you're on the weekends, most of the time, these accidents are happening from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. And unfortunately, one of the biggest things in our culture that you'll find out very quickly is beer, alcohol, going on, from bar hopping and all of that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, it's just a huge part of this community. There will be dealerships that will say, hey, free beer, just come up here. Come on, bring your bike. Now look, you can do whatever the heck you want, right? It is a free country, but alcohol and motorcycles don't mix. Speeding and motorcycles don't mix. The majority of crashes happen in, corners, single vehicle accidents, right? So that's just the rider making a mistake. So the last thing you want to introduce to this equation is something that's going to impair your decision making, because things can happen very quickly out there. So while the culture says that these things mix, right? And hey, let's be honest, man, I just talked about a bar and a restaurant that I went to, but how much did I have to drink? 0. I don't drink at all, so there's that. It's really easy for me to not drink. But at the same time, just a couple of beers, depending upon who you are and your tolerance and all of that, it's still going to slow your decision making down. And on a motorcycle, it's not something that you really want to mess around with. A couple beers, typically get in your vehicle, and most people are going to be safe. But on a bike, it's just a different story. And like I said, it's unfortunately a part of the culture. It ain't going nowhere. Bar hopping and all of that kind of stuff, free drinks for riders and all of that, you're going to see it a lot. But again, it's something that as a new rider, a returning rider, and even experienced riders, I would say you absolutely want to avoid. Now, the next thing I want to talk about here is the 6-month slump. So the first 6 months of you riding is going to be crucial. Now, I was always under the impression that the first 6 months or maybe even year of you riding, it was actually some of the safest riding you could do, because typically new riders, or even returning, they're going to go a little bit slower. They're going to be super aware of everything that's going on around them. And then once you get past that 6 month, 8 months, maybe even a year mark, that's where you start to relax a little bit and you're like, oh man, I got this. And then, that's when bad things can happen. But that's actually the opposite of what is true according to statistics. I read some going back to 2019. And so they found that of the fatalities that year, which there was like 5,337 that year, which was the highest number that year. And then we just talked about 2021. But regardless, they found that of those fatalities, 52% of those riders had less than 5 months experience. That's pretty sobering, right? 92% of riders were actually self-taught. So this kind of goes back to a couple more things I was talking about earlier. But yeah, like I said, do I need to really say much more than that? 52% under 5 months of experience, and 92% are quote unquote self-taught. Like I said, your instincts on a motorcycle are wrong. You have to accept that and seek out that training. And again, use YouTube. You're right here. There's so many good training videos that you can follow along with. Some of the guys out there have apps that you can just dude, it's so easy, man. So you don't even have to invest a bunch of money. You just have to invest a little bit of time into it in order to be a safer rider. Another thing that you want to avoid, by the way, and this is just kind of a bonus before we get to our last thing, you want to avoid motorcycles that don't have ABS. And the last thing I want to talk about for new and returning riders is avoid your passenger. Avoid your wife. That doesn't mean you should literally avoid them, but you should not let them on your motorcycle until you know that you can do some of these basic things. You've taken some of the training, and until you are realistic with yourself, and you could be realistic with them and tell them, look, I'm just not comfortable having you on the back of the bike. You have to make sure that you can control the motorcycle, do all of these basic things with just you before you introduce somebody else that now you're responsible for. Because again, we're already taking more risk on by throwing a leg over, so now you're increasing the risk for them as well. And for the love of God, make sure that they are wearing a helmet too. Even if you're not, make sure that your passenger, which is most likely going to be your significant other or a child or whatever, that they're wearing protective gear. And that you have the necessary skills in order to keep them upright and make sure that they're riding with you safely. So there you go. That's my opinion. And of course, I want to hear from y'all, man, whether you agree or disagree, or maybe leave your own list of things that you think new and returning riders should avoid. If you like the content I do here, consider subscribing, hit your notifications, and of course, I'd love to have you guys join the Shot Squad right here on YouTube or over on Patreon. Big thanks to you guys. See you in the next one. And as always, hold 'em down.